and give some context to how we got into a constitutional conundrum over sex offenders. That's coming up on Almanac.
Almanac.
A commission charged with fixing Minnesota's sex offender civil commitment system came out with a three-part reform plan this week. 1, set up an independent court to review cases. 2, find a way to release less serious offenders. And 3, treat juvenile acts differently than adult cases. The recommendations now go to the legislature for some action. Here's background right now from Mary LaHammer on how we got to where we are today.
It was a decade ago that Minnesotans came to fear the more than 100 Level 3 convicted sex offenders, most likely to offend again, who were on the streets, out of prison after serving their time. This after released sex offender Alfonso Rodriguez killed college student Drew Shadeen.
The person had been in prison for 23 years, had not shown any indication of an inability to control sexual impulses.
As a Minnesotan, as governor, as the dad of 2 young daughters, I'm fed up. I am fed up with these stories where we have children abducted, women abducted. I support the death penalty.
Rodriguez did get the death penalty in North Dakota, but Governor Pawlenty did not get the death penalty reinstated in Minnesota. Instead, he got tougher penalties for sex offenders and more civil commitments.
But not before the legislature struggled with a bill, hearing heartbreaking accounts from victims' families and friends.
Tortured, beat, and raped our friend.
How much will it cost? I'll just leave you with the question, what are your children worth?
Young lawmaker Kurt Zellers quickly took the lead on the issue.
When my daughter's in college, when my daughter's in high school, won't have to suffer the loss, not only of life, but of innocence that's stolen from them.
But others warned of playing politics with sex offenders.
We have to be rational. We have to be tough. But we have to be smart and make sure we're basing it not on fear, but on what really is needed.
And so many years later, that's where we're at, still searching for a political solution to a social problem fraught with fear. What to do with sex offenders who have served their time, maybe never even been convicted, but still have a policy that can pass constitutional muster.
The political partisanship was just made it clear that this is going to be an issue that will be seized upon and abused by some who want to, don't mind scaring the people of Minnesota.
Former state Supreme Court Chief Justice Eric Magnuson chaired the state-appointed commission that came up with this week's proposed changes, and he's back on the program. Always good to see you.
Good to be here.
What's the problem that these new recommendations are trying to address, generally speaking?
Well, I think we made it pretty clear in both our first report last year and in this report that there's a recognized problem with the system, that there's no way to get out of it. Too many people get swept into it. It's an all or nothing thing. If you're either committed to the most secure facility or you're not. And once you're there, you don't get out. The constitutional basis for committing someone civilly is that they're ill and you have to treat them. But the treatment's not effective in this environment.
You have an idea for a panel of, is it retired judges to make some determination on who's in and who's out? Is that?
That's one of the recommendations. It's not an original idea with us. There have been 3 major studies before our task force: the 2005 Governor Pawlenty task force, the 2011 legislative auditor study, and a DHS audit itself. And everyone recognizes that the independence of the decision makers, both on the decision to commit and the decision to release, is really important.
Now, we've been told that these folks are the worst of the worst. How do you winnow those that are really bad actors and obviously have problems and cannot be treated with those who maybe have some redeeming qualities? You can work with them.
Well, you're right. It's an extremely difficult process because what you're doing is you're trying to predict future behavior. Remember, these are people who have either completed their criminal sentence or haven't been convicted of a crime, but have nonetheless been committed. And you're keeping them out of fear of what they might do in the future. To do that, what we emphasized is you really need to have the best science, the best medicine available applied consistently. The statutory criteria are fairly simple. It's, you know, a high probability of causing serious harm through sexual misconduct. But picking the people who fit that is more difficult. So we've recommended a scientifically based screening panel. Then county attorneys get to decide based on that assessment whether they want to go ahead or not. Then you take it to a court who has expertise in the area. Once people are committed, those same groups then review changes or release from commitment.
Would longer prison terms be part of the equation to keep them in the criminal system instead of the civil commitment process?
Our report talks about recent legislative amendments that have extended significantly the length of criminal sentences. That's, I mean, unless you're going to lock people up for life, criminal sentences come to an end. And the idea of civil commitment is to make an assessment at that point in time whether there is a significant risk of serious personal harm if these people are released.
Why is this plan better than waiting for the result of, say, the federal judge weighing in on this issue? Because that's what could happen, of course.
Well, you have to keep in mind that the genesis of our task force was a pending federal lawsuit challenging on a constitutional basis the way the system is operated. Now, the constitutional concept of civil commitment of sex offenders has been approved by the United States Supreme Court. In theory, this is what's known as an as-applied challenge. It's how the system works now. A federal judge applying the Constitution is not going to rewrite or fine-tune any system. He's going to strike it down or let it stay in place. And as I have said repeatedly, federal judges wield a broadsword, not a scalpel. And if the state really wants to be in control of what happens to the system, it has to be proactive as opposed to just sitting back and seeing what a federal judge does.
What have the key lawmakers told you just at first blush of your recommendations?
Well, I haven't talked to anyone yet about this report. I spent a fair amount of time talking to legislators after our first report came out, and I think there's broad recognition that there are serious issues. There's a real diversity of opinion on whether it is something that can be solved through adjustment of the current system or whether we need to really make some major changes. I think there's significant interest in making some more significant changes.
Thanks for coming by. We appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
This week's political panel, all former lawmakers. Republicans go first. Amy Koch is a former Senate Majority Leader. Chris De La Forest joins us, former Republican House member and staffer to Governor Pawlenty. He's now a lobbyist. Democrats here tonight, former longtime State Senator Ember Reichgott-Young. Carla Begum is here. She's a retired DFL House member.
What's going to happen with this sex offender? We heard from Chief Justice Magnuson. It's such an easy thing to kind of get on your soapbox and harp on, and it's a very unsympathetic group of people you're talking about, sex offenders. What do you think the legislature is going to be up to there?
It's an incredibly vexing problem, first and foremost, right? You have these competing public policy goals. One is that it's well-settled constitutional law and a principle that confining people post-conviction indefinitely is extremely problematic, to say the least. But by the same token, there's a good public policy purpose for it. Locking up sex offenders is a good idea. They tend to be incorrigible, they're violent, they molest children. And so I think what has to be admitted, and maybe a former lawmaker can admit this, that really one of the primary purpose of MSOP is not treatment, but it's to keep these people off the street. And there's a good public policy rationale for that, but it creates all sorts of constitutional problems. It's really difficult. Are politicians going to make anything happen? That's difficult.
Yeah, I think that hopefully the legislature will take some time to go through the recommendations. My opinion is that the recommendations brought forward were not very quick fixes. They were long-term fixes that are going to take some work. But hopefully they tweak the program a little bit, but maintain the fact that the top priority needs to be public safety of these communities. These people will get let out, and they'll go into communities, and it's public safety is the top priority, and that's what needs to be kept in mind.
Justice Magnuson, I think, framed the issue. Either let the federal courts do it for us or we do it ourselves. Perhaps the easiest way to do this politically is if Judge Frank, who's a very thoughtful judge,
The U.S. District Judge.
U.S. District Court judge, laid out, sort of telegraphed what he thought might be the outcome of this so that the legislature could see that. And he could say something like, this is what might happen if you do not step in, legislature, by June 1st. And that way, the legislature would be forced to come together and say, well, we either do it our way or look at the costs that the court might impose, look at the consequences, look at where they're going to be located, and we want to do that ourselves, and that might bring the legislature together.
I mean, it just goes back to the, I guess what Chris said in the first part, which is that it's vexing. Because it's very, one thing to have this academic discussion, even have an academic discussion in a committee, about when you're talking about letting out violent criminals that have done things such as some of these people have, the academics goes out the window and you start worrying about simple public safety and safety of families.
And it's an election year, too.
Yeah.
You know, and the House is up for re-election.
In my years in the Senate, and I served 18 years, I don't think there was any issue more challenging and difficult politically than this one. And that's why it's really imperative everybody comes together early on to try to make this happen and not make it political.